So I have something I'd like to admit to you all this morning. Don't worry, it's not anything scandalous. It's also not anything about my secret past of going to punk rock shows whenever I was a teen. But it is a problem, and I'm trying to own this problem and be honest about it. I have a problem with something I like to call main character syndrome. And it's exactly what it sounds like. I tend to think of myself as the main character of the story. In my head, I'm the center of every single story. I'm the hero, yeah. I'm the person in the middle of all who saves the day. And I try to do everything on my own because that's what the hero does, right? I want to have creative control over the projects and be the leader. And it can be really, really hard for me to let go of something, to trust someone else with it, because I want to be the one who does it. I want all the credit. I want to be the main character who gets their name written down in the story, who is remembered as important and receives the accolades for being the hero. I want to be Moses in the story, the person written down in the Bible. Does anyone else have this problem of main character syndrome? I see a few hands out there. We all kind of like this idea of being the main character because the main character's important. The main character matters. They're the center of attention. They get to be the hero of the story and the only one person who saves the day, all on their own. And they get the credit. And being the main character is kind of awesome because it makes sense why we like to imagine ourselves as the central figure whenever we read books or watch TV shows. They're usually who we naturally relate to. For example, whenever we think about the story we read today from Exodus, we immediately think about who? Moses. Yes, exactly. We don't think of any other character. We think about Moses because Moses is the main character. We don't remember the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who protect the babies from being killed, which includes Moses, by the way, at the beginning of the book. We just remember Moses floating down the river and the Pharaoh's daughter finding him. We don't remember that side character, Aaron, who speaks for Moses because he apparently doesn't talk very well. We just remember how Moses, sends these plagues upon Egypt. We don't remember Miriam leading the way with song and tambourine as the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. We just remember Moses praying to God and the waters parting. The main character gets all the credit. We only remember Moses. And my problem is, I want that. Yeah. I want to be Moses. I want to be the hero of the story. I want to be the one who does it all, so I'm the one who's remembered. I don't want to be a forgotten side character in the story. Now, you might be wondering, why is this a problem, Ryan? Why is it so bad wanting to be the hero of the story? Shouldn't we all try to be the main character? Shouldn't we look up to the main character and try to be kind of like them? I think the main problem I see with main character syndrome is that in God's story, there's no such thing as being the main character. No one can be the main character in God's story except for God. There's no such thing as doing it on our own or being the lone hero who saves the day in God's story, because it really isn't our story. We might choose to emphasize Moses' part of God's story, but he's not the central figure. God is the central figure in our text today, and the same is true for our lives. Our stories, while they are important, are not the main focus. Our culture kind of articulates a white privilege narrative about how we can find success all on our own, without anyone's help, by pursuing the American dream. But we as Christian people know that this is simply not true. And the Bible reads story after story after story about how God's people could not do it on their own. Moses would not be alive if it weren't for the midwives. Moses' message to Pharaoh would not have been heard if it had not been for Aaron. Miriam shows us that Moses was not the singular leader of the Israelites. We as Christians know there is a different story. We know the work of liberation is not something that will happen due to one individual hero who saves the day on their own. We know that we need each other, and we need God for us to find freedom from the things that hold us captive in our world today. So when I say that I have a problem with main character syndrome and trying to do everything by myself, I really do mean it's a problem. Because I'm living with a mindset that is contrary to God's vision for our world. I'm living as if I am the main character, when I really should be trying with all my might and all of my strength to live as a character in God's story. I have let my own sense of self-importance cloud the reality that my story is somehow more important than others, when in reality, I'm no more important than anyone else, because we all have a part in God's story of liberation. And God's story, my work up here as a pastor, is just as important as each of your work here. Now, I really want you to hear that last part. Your story is still important. In fact, it is incredibly important in a world that needs healing. While you aren't going to be the main character who saves the whole world on your own, you are part of the solution. In God's story, we each have a role to play, and we can't play someone else's part. Whenever we try to play the role of the main character, it keeps us from actually participating in the healing and liberating work God has called each of us to do. For example, when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to be the next Francis of Assisi. Yeah. If you don't know who Francis of Assisi is, he was a main character in the Christian church in the early 1200s. And he did lots of crazy things, like he gave away all of his wealth and all of his clothes at one point and didn't have any. And then he started the Franciscan order. And he was seen as this kind of holy inspiration for people during his lifetime and continues to be an inspiration for people afterwards. And so I tried to emulate him in my life. I tried to give away all my possessions and all of my clothes. I lived really simply. I made friends with homeless neighbors and trees. And I tried my best to live a life of prayer, just like Francis of Assisi. But there was a problem. I'm not Francis. I'm Ryan. I don't live in the 11th century. I live in 2023. The world back then needed Francis of Assisi, and the world today needs me to be Ryan Roth-Klink, not Francis of Assisi. And the same is true for all of us here today. The world does not need you to be someone else. We don't need another Moses. We don't need another Mary Magdalene, Apostle Paul, Teresa of Avila, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Dorothy Day, or Martin Luther King Jr. God does not need you to be someone else. God needs you to know who you are and to act from your authentic self. Now, the challenge for many of us is that we've been playing a character who is not who we truly are for a long time. In fact, we may not actually know who we are because our culture and world has told us we need to play the role of someone else or play the role of a main character. So it can be hard for us to know how to take an action from an authentic place. We all know the normal ways of taking actions against injustice. We hear, go big and go bold. Show up to the front lines of a protest. Yell at the top of your lungs. Call your senator. Put a flag in your yard. Get into a fight with someone on social media. Those can be good and worthwhile things to do to face injustice. And there's something to say about getting out of our comfort zone. But if you're a little like me, those can feel a little intimidating. Maybe not true to who you are. And so my question for us is, are these kinds of actions an authentic way for you to resist injustice in your life? Are you truly being yourself if you did an action like that? Or is there another way for you to act while also being true to who you are and to yourself? Too often we feel like we have to resist injustice in a certain way, but it lacks conviction because it isn't coming from a true and honest place within us. And so I'd like us to consider not resisting as a main character, as someone maybe we aren't truly. I'd like us to resist like Shiphrah and Puah, like Aaron and Miriam. These people were side characters, but they still resisted injustice in their own way, and it had a profound impact on the story. Shiphrah and Puah resisted with their inaction to the Pharaoh. And by not doing what the emperor told them, they kept Moses alive. Aaron was basically the speechwriter for Moses, so he wouldn't fumble his words. Miriam led the people in song in the face of destruction. I like to say each of these people used their moxie. And moxie is when we do an authentic action for the greater good of others. They did something to resist injustice in a way that was true to who they are. So the question remains for all of us then. What is a truly authentic action for yourself? How do we follow in Shiphrah, Puah, Aaron, and Miriam's footsteps? How do we use our moxie today to do an authentic action for the greater good? I'd like to leave us with an example from my life that I think fits this. A few years ago, I was in a place of transition in my life and found myself working somewhere I really did not enjoy. The working conditions were not great. Employees were constantly yelled at and overworked. The hours are long, and the pay was abysmal. It was less than $10 an hour, and I have a master's degree. And Christina and I were honestly barely scraping by. And my main character syndrome was not super satisfied with this situation. And I became pretty depressed because I felt trapped in a situation where I wasn't the hero. I was just a side character checking people's groceries out. And I remember talking with my spiritual director about this, about how I felt so anxious to go to work every single day because it felt like there was nothing I could do in this situation that felt really unjust. And my spiritual director followed this comment with a powerful question. She asked, well, Ryan, is that true? Is there truly nothing you can do that's authentic to who you are? It was a good question. It made me stop and think for a while. And as I sat there and thought and thunk about myself and what would be true for me, I realized something in that moment. And I said to her, here's something I can do. I can be honest and say, I'm not okay. Whenever someone asks me how I am doing, I can own the truth that I am not okay. And I can disrupt the illusion that all is well with me. And so after that session, I started to say, I'm not okay. That was my action. I'm not okay. And when people asked me how I was doing, I said, I'm not okay. And they stopped. And they asked what was going on, and they listened. And then it was interesting because some other employees heard me saying, I'm not okay, and they said, I'm not okay either. Like, this really sucks. And so they also started saying, I'm not okay. And again, more people stopped and asked what was going on, and they listened. And then it was really strange and interesting as these employees were saying, I'm not okay, in kind of this unified chorus. It wasn't the employees who solved their own situation, it was the customers. They started writing letters to the bosses and sending emails to them, expressing that they were concerned about the working conditions of the store. And you know what? Things started to change, slowly. It turns out that I wasn't the main character, but my action of saying I'm not okay still mattered. Your authentic action does not have to be this big, grand gesture. It can be something as small as saying, I'm not okay. And that itself can lead to real healing and change in the face of injustice. So may we each discern how we can use our moxie to resist injustice in our world. In the name of the Trinity of Love. Amen.